summer heat storms have gotten more intense. So we import about a third of our energy right now. And if you look at this chart on the right, where the state in red, we, more than any other state, significantly consume more than we generate in state. So there are doubts from some, from proponents of this, as to whether or not we will have, if we're relying sort of on the current status quo, if we can build enough quickly enough. And then I think one thing that's changing right now is that some of these imports may become less available. A lot of these other states are having their own clean energy goals. And so they may not be able to import or export as much to California as they currently have. So there's doubts to whether we can build enough, fast enough, especially if these imports begin to decline. Next slide. I think coupled on top of that, and on top of this idea that a lot of other states have started to set their own clean energy goals, is that as part of that, a lot of states are now requiring that they join some sort of regional transmission operator. So you'll see, I think it was actually also in a previous picture, but especially in this picture. So right now, there's a lot of states that aren't part of an RTO, but that's changing as these states are setting new clean energy targets. And so there's an existing RTO, the Southwest Power Pool, that's actually creating a new market. So CC mentioned there's EDAM and there's WEIM. And so those are sort of two markets that CAISO created that other states are part of. There's a new market that's being created through the Southwest Power Pool that's asking other states to join them. And if you look at this sort of cobalt blue color in the map, those are the states that have already preliminarily agreed to join this new Markets Plus system, meaning that they would potentially be leaving WEIM. So it would mean that the current market that CAISO operates would just be less effective. One of the reasons that this new market is so appealing is that the governance board is not appointed by a specific state. So right now, these states are part of WEIM, but CAISO is a California appointed board. So this is sort of like an opportunity to be part of something that doesn't have California specific governance, which could be appealing to other states. If these states end up leaving WEIM, it would mean that the benefits we gain from having that market, so the economic benefits to reduce ratepayer costs, the ability to easily trade real-time to trade power with other states, all of that would be diminished. So there's a concern that if we don't change the way we currently operate the CAISO and change how it's run, we'll sort of become an island similar to Texas, as you saw on that initial map. And we will see all these other states go somewhere else, and there'll be less resources available to California. Next slide. So that leads kind of right into these arguments in support of regionalization. So proponents of regionalization think that by creating some sort of new system, and whether that's an expansion of CAISO or rethinking what CAISO looks like, I'll talk later about AB 538 and exactly what that's proposing. But stepping back from that, I think there are a lot of ways to look at regionalization, and in general, it's the idea of moving away from just the CAISO and expanding that to additional states. So supporters of regionalization say that this will allow us to work more closely with other states to improve reliability. So we'll be able to pool generating resources across a larger region and not just across California. Similarly, we'll be able to work more closely with a much larger geographical range to try to accelerate decarbonization by looking at where clean energy resources are producing at what times, and more easily use those resources, even if they're not California based. There's also a argument that with all of the clean energy resources that have to be built, we'll be able to work with other states to improve transmission planning and streamline and share the costs of all the transmission that has to be built. And that gets right into cost reduction. So by working with other states, we'll be able to spread the costs around and make sure that we are making smart investments that are not burdened by just where state lines start and end, and share those costs again. Next slide. So these arguments are really, can really fit into sort of three camps. So there's some environmental groups, the business community, and a large part of the energy community. On the environmental side, we're really looking at some of the larger grass tops groups. So NRDC, Environmental Defense Fund, those are the two that have really primarily been pushing this and have been working as part of a coalition and have done studies to advance this, advance support for this idea. Business community, you'll see a mix here, Cal Chamber really leading the way, but they have been sort of a large proponent as well in terms of this being the right move for California. And then on the energy side, you'll see there's one CCA here. There's at least one IOU, and then a lot of clean energy companies have been supportive. And then I think most significantly, CAISO itself has been very publicly supportive of this idea. Next slide. So arguments against regionalization. One of the biggest ones is loss of state control. So this would be a pretty big shift. Right now, we are really the only state that has this structure where the governor appoints all 5 members of the CAISO, and then the Senate confirms them. And it really is, even though it's an independent body, it is a state-appointed board that is aligned with California's values. So there's a lot of fear about moving to a structure where California would only have 1 vote, and other states would be on the board as well. There's also concern about increased federal oversight. So CAISO is in a unique position, and we have a unique governance structure where FERC has limited control over what we do, or has less control over what we do than it could if we were to change our current structure. And there's a concern that depending on who is in charge federally, we could have a FERC that is not aligned with California's clean energy values. There's also a concern about job creation, that more projects built outside of California means jobs that are not necessarily in California. So I think it's not so much job loss as a loss of potential jobs, but that there would no longer be a priority to have in-state jobs. And then finally, state level decarbonization. So even though there are many states that have been moving towards our clean energy goals, there are still a lot of states that could be part of this that are not exactly where we are, that have weaker goals than we do. We would have less control, and potentially clean energy resources would be valued less if we were part of a system that other states were part of that had, gas-fired resources, let's say, and didn't have as many clean energy resources as California did. Next slide. And then here are the key opponents against regionalization. So much larger environmental group, but really you'll see here it's a different type of environmental population. It's more of the grassroots environmental groups as opposed to the grass tops. So just something to note. Sierra Club is probably the most significant group there. Labor is also opposed to this, and they've come out pretty strongly against it. I think, what they have said is that this would be a significant hit to jobs, to in-state jobs. And again, we're really talking here about loss of potential jobs, not loss of current jobs. And then finally, ratepayer advocates. There's a concern that this would increase costs to Californians. I will note, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the bill, it's a little bit difficult for me to fully understand that one, only because we don't know what the bill would look like and exactly, I think there's a lot there that still needs to be figured out. But the argument with ratepayer costs is that we would be paying for a regional system as opposed to a California specific system. We'd be paying for transmission costs that may help other states, and therefore ratepayer costs could go up. Next slide. Yeah. So that was all about the concept of regionalization. This is the specific bill that's in front of us. And again, as Ted and Cece both mentioned, it's now a 2-year bill. There's not a need to take any immediate action, but I think this is the vehicle that we will probably be looking at for the next at least 2 years. And so even though it may change, there's some of what's in here will probably stay the same. So the way that the bill is structured right now is that CAISO would develop and submit a governance proposal to the CEC that would have to meet specific governance requirements. Those requirements are on the next slide. So keep that in mind that we will be talking about those in a moment. Once the CEC receives that proposal, they would work with the PUC and CARB to review it. They would have to hold at least 5 public hearings to get feedback on it. Once they have passed it on their end, they would send it to the legislature who would then review it and provide any feedback on the structure. Once the legislature is weighed in, it would go back to the CAISO. If there was interest from other states, the CAISO, and if FERC has approved it, the CAISO would begin to implement the structure. And then there's additional checks and balances throughout between FERC, CEC, CAISO, the Secretary of State. And so I think the main point here is that there are a lot of checks and balances from all of the relevant state agencies as it goes through the process. Next slide. So here's the governance requirements as in the current bill. So there would have to be an equal number of representatives from each state that's part of this that would sit on the governing board. So again, a big change from the current governance structure of 5 members appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. All meetings would have to be open, consistent with Bagley-Keene Act, so similar to what we currently have, public access to records. There would still be language in there that would maintain state authority over state matters having to do with resource planning, resource preferencing, procurement policy, transmission siting. So all of the things having to do with what we value in our state would stay the same. There would be language to ensure that California's climate policies and the cost of those resources are still appropriately reflected, again, maintaining California's clean energy goals. And then there would be language to ensure that specific resources that California cares about, storage, demand response, distributed energy resources, would still be able to participate. And then finally, and this was sort of the most recent amendments before the bill got moved to a 2-year bill, there would be language in the bill to ensure that California's current preference for in-state renewable energy development over out-of-state development is maintained. So something in there would have to speak to that. Next slide, and I think that might be, yes, so that's the end of the slides. And as Ted mentioned, we would love to open it up for discussion, feedback, questions, any and all of those things.
Thank you. Wow, that's a lot. I have some questions. I'll start off and then we can see if anyone else does. I am trying to wrap my brain around it. Gina, can you tell me, or Cece, why the 2018 bill failed? What was it that didn't get through the legislature, and what's different about this one from 2018?
I actually, Cece or Ted, you are both.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that. Okay. Just for a little bit of history. This was something that Governor Brown was deeply invested in. At one point along the way in his negotiations with labor was kind of given a choice, and he chose to save the cap and trade program rather than push this, because labor was against both of them. And so there was a deal, and it it got shelved. But again, the idea didn't get shelved. I think the two things that have changed in the market dynamics that are bringing it back to the fore, actually three things. One is other states are moving, and they're moving, and they could gobble up the rest of the West, and we could end up like Texas. And we see all of the problems that Texas faces with its own grid. And we don't, that would be not a good outcome. The second thing that's bringing it back up are the reliability issues that we have faced. And if you remember looking at that chart about how dependent we are on keeping the lights on other states. And again, if we lose access to the other states, in 2018, reliability was not so much of a forefront of the mind, so it was less politically attractive. And then I think the third thing that has changed is people are now beginning to see the enormity of the situation in terms of, can we actually build our way in state to meet those goals, to meet the state's climate goals? And that's why I think you see, some of the environmental groups and certainly the clean energy folks saying, maybe we have to take a more regional approach to where we build, because we know how hard and expensive it is to build in California. So those are the three things that have changed in the market dynamics that are pushing this back up. I will say, even if this passes, there will be tons of development in California. It's not like it's all going away, but the real fear is from a reliability and cost perspective, that the other states get together and turn us into a island.
Got it. Okay, and then if I'm understanding it correctly, the cost, if you will, of that is that we maybe lose some control over the power content of what we would import. I mean, it sounds like we don't really we wouldn't really have as much say over how much decarbonization is happening in those states. And so we're importing, how much control do we have over the content of what we would be hooking up with? So
Cece or Gina, do you want to address that? It's a multi-dimensional question, which has a couple of answers. So
yeah, I can try and take the stab at it. I think, keep in mind that we are already trading with other states. California has our own clean energy goals. There's the renewable portfolio standards. There's our own decarbonization goal, 100% clean energy by 2045. We will be able to continue to meet that, as low-serving entities. We are already currently importing from other states. That's really not going to change. I think what's really going to, I think, where there may be concerns is that, for instance, FERC, because we're trading with other states more, FERC may have more impact on how our decarbonization policies can influence the transmission, the market, the scheduling of supply and demand. And, I also just want to put a reminder there, FERC already has authority over market tariffs today. So I think some of those concerns about the imports and how those are going to impact our ability to meet our decarbonization goals, may or may not be grounded in facts.
I'll note that this is back to your first question, Deborah, what's changed? I think one of the reasons that the 2018 effort failed, in addition to internal state politics, was that we had Trump in the White House, and FERC was not so pro. There was more concern about ceding some political control to FERC under a Trump presidency, and that was very legitimate. And that's not the case now, but
Right.
it might be in the future. So that's why CC's hedging there a little bit, which is we're not sure how that how much it's founded.
Can I just?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, just real quick, because there's sort of like a really big picture thing, which is I think what we're talking about, and then there's the CPA picture, which is a big but somewhat smaller piece of the pie. So for us, regionalization will not limit our ability to procure the resources that we want to procure to meet our customer demands. We still will have the ability to go out and sign up contracts with individual power plants wherever they happen to be. I think from our perspective, it could potentially open up the possibility for more resources out of state if CPA and our board decides that's something we want to do. So it would make it easier probably to import, but like
import, right? I guess that's my question, is that I'm hearing two different things. I'm hearing that we may need to regionalize to be able to meet our state climate goals, but yet we're at the same time losing control to a certain extent over the content of what we're importing. So those two things are what's not jiving in my brain right now.
Yeah, so think about it like this. Right now, California, because it's its own balancing authority, we're to some extent an island. We're an island with, like, I don't know, bridges that go to other places. But within our island, we because there's those bridges, we can, like, put the fence up and make sure no one else comes in. Or we can say only certain things are allowed to come in. But we have a really good handle on what's going on within our island. And because we're not entirely for jurisdiction on all the capacity stuff and certain things, we have more ability to exclude certain resources that we don't like. So California has at this point pretty strict rules about coal and coal imports, for example. Under a FERC model, basically you're expanding that footprint of that island to now more and more states, and those states may have coal resources, for example, and they would sort of be in the pool of electricity that we think of right now as sort of our unspecified power. So you'd have in the mix some things that maybe California wouldn't like, and because it would be FERC jurisdictional, FERC could come in and say, and actually I think they'd probably be somewhat likely to say that you can't make the same kind of preferences in a multi-state model that you can in a single state model that's not under FERC jurisdiction. So that's at the really big market level. If nobody wants, like, if there's a coal plant, and there's fewer and fewer, like throughout the West, they're retiring off. But if nobody wants to buy the power from the coal plant, they don't have to. But it's sort of a question of, are those resources even able to provide electricity into California? Right now, you basically can't, or it's very difficult to. Under a regional model, somebody who is inclined to get coal would be more likely to be able to access that. So for CPA, I don't think it, like, in terms of the clean content of our electricity, again, it just gives us more options under our way of thinking. But if you think about the actor who least cares about the environment on the electric grid, like somebody else, they would have potentially more options to purchase dirty power, for example, and that universe that we operate in would suddenly get bigger, and it would include Arizona Public Service, and it would include PNM in Mexico, and some other entities that probably already are pretty reliant on coal. So that just becomes part of our ecosystem, and I think that's sort of more what the environmental groups are worried about, is that it gives you an option that's bad, whereas right now you don't even have it. In our case, we're not doing that regardless, so. it's
Right,
sort of-
okay,
And
okay.
something just to add to that, even, well, one thing to add is that I think another thing that's changed since 2018 is that, yes, some other states may have resources like coal, but they are mainly moving towards a cleaner direction. And so while those resources exist, they're becoming fewer and fewer. And I think that's why there are still environmental groups that support this, that say, even if worst case scenario, we have a FERC that's run by someone who's very not aligned with our views, the states themselves are moving towards cleaner energy. And so that will stay regardless of who's in charge of FERC.
Okay, I actually have a bunch more questions. Let me just ask one more and then I'll turn it over to everyone else because I know we're running out of time. You said there was a review and 5 public hearings and let's go through the legislature and back to CAISO. What is the time frame if this were to, if this were to pass at the end of next year's legislative session, now that it's a 2-year bill, like what is the time frame that we're talking about to roll this regionalization out?
That's a great question. With the fact that it's been changed to 2 years, I'm going to have to look at that, Director Lopez. Let me get back to you on that for when this would actually start happening. Like
Okay.
because mind you, there's a combination of the creation of the new model and then states agreeing to be part of it. So in terms of something like this actually operating, we are looking at a little bit of time, but let me get back to you on what that actually looks like.
Okay. Cedric, Rita, I think we lost John.
I'm here.
Oh, you're there. There you are. Okay. Your head is cut off on my, any questions from the rest of the committee?
Looks like I can see all the hands. It looks like
Oh, I can't.
all of them have hands up. So
All right. My iPad is old and even my own head is cut off, so I can't see the hands. Okay, go ahead, John.
No, I just wanted to say, well, hello, nice to see you all.
Hello.
From West Hollywood. Sorry, I'm late. 10 a.m. is hard. In terms of regionalization, is there a potential litigation issue that could come before us? Mainly because I'm concerned with the stuff I've seen Texas try to do within their energy markets and what that would look like. So I don't know if there's any type of legal memo that we could get or understand with risk of litigation. We're probably not there yet, obviously, because it's a ways away, but I think that's something we should pay attention to. And the reason why I bring this up is because Texas ruins everything for everyone. We can't have nice things anymore because of Texas. But I also say that I think this is a really important regional thing that we have to get to, because I think we're already probably 10 years too late on this one. When I look at the way in which my day job with Planned Parenthood is, we've always said we needed a national or a regional strategy for when Roe v. Wade goes away, right? And now we're seeing states just kind of have different laws. And so this regional approach will probably blend into a national approach, I hope one day. But any type of litigation that I've been seeing, mostly with challenging a lot of these things, are coming out of Texas. So it's just something I would love to see how we're looking at ahead of time. If there's any insight from the governor's team with this, or if the states would join together, or if there'd be like an attorneys general's lawsuit that we're seeing all over. So I'm just worried about litigation or the threat of litigation as usual. But that's all I have to say. Otherwise, I think this is a great approach. And I'm really thankful for the staff for what they've provided here. And that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Cedric?
Thank you for that. My biggest concerns are twofold. One is cost control, and the other one is transmission costs as well. We are with Edison now with CPA, and we're always concerned regarding Edison's going up on the transmission costs for our energy. And my concern would be regional. What would that new cost will be in relationship to a regional approach? So see anything in the information that was shared today and regarding any of the costs that might be considered for usage?
yeah, it's I'll just say, first of all, it's hard to predict what the costs will be when you don't know who the market participants are, who actually ends up joining. But the economic studies certainly point to, if you have more inter-regional trading, you're able to build less, in fact, build less transmission because you're pooling, and that the transmission costs would be under, would I hate to say go down, would rise less fast under a regional approach.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rita?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. So, I mean, I think we kind of talked about why the environmental groups were opposed. I was curious if there are like very specific points out of the list that some of them are opposing on. Also curious if there have been any environmental justice groups that have weighed in. And I guess, sorry, I'm like pulling a bunch of questions at the same time. But on the labor question too, I was just curious, like as we're talking about this governance structure, if there is any ability to kind of add in policies that would address their concerns, maybe ensure that some amount of projects are still built in California, or have like some kind of labor policies associated.
Yeah, so I'll take the second part of the question first. Yes, that was definitely desire, and that the last amendment that was accepted before it became 2 years, I think it was one of the bullets on the slide, was that there would still be a preference for in-state versus out-of-state development. So that is, I think, very aligned with a lot of the concerns that both labor and legislators had. And what that actually looks like is still TBD. The details would have to be written, but that is in there. To your first question about environmental groups, so I think all of the concerns that were sort of that Deborah floated and that were mentioned on the call is what some of those groups are concerned about. We do have stronger goals than other states. Like, we continue to have stronger goals, and there's a concern that a board that is not California run is going to diminish that, or is going to make other resources the priority over the resources that California has designated. I think there's also, you mentioned environmental justice groups. Both environmental and environmental justice groups, I think also, especially environmental justice groups, tend to be very aligned with labor's goals. And so there's also a concern from their end about the exact same labor concerns that labor itself has, is that jobs will be outsourced to other states, or jobs will be reduced in California. So they share those concerns as well. So I don't think it's necessarily anything that is that's like new or not mentioned yet on this call, but it really does come down to a fear of other states making the values around what resources are counted in the energy mix, and then a fear about jobs going to other states and going away from California.
Yeah, I'll just say, Rita, that it's not within the environmental justice world. It's not something that has been high on their list to be a part of a coalition on one side or another. I think it's frankly more about the splits in the environmental world on this are more about groups that are taking a national or regional view to decarbonization versus more at the local level, and believing that California can sort of continue to do it on its own. And I think that's where a lot of the split comes from.
Okay,
Thanks.
well,
That makes sense. Sorry. go ahead.
Sorry, Rita. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that makes sense. Just a quick question. I was just curious whether in this regionalization process, whether CAISO will have like sort of discretion, I guess, on who their partners can be, and whether they can sort of be strategic about choosing partners who will be sort of aligned with California.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of this things about in the competition between the Southwest Power Pool and CAISO to regionalize, we saw most of the Southwest Power Pool is is red states. And, obviously CAISO's from a blue state. One of the concerns that regionalization proponents have is that you would negotiate so many California control things in the legislation that no other state would end up wanting to join. And you would cede the regional governance to the Southwest Power Pool, which is mostly governed by red states. And so there is a little bit of that, to your point about like how many checks and how much control you have with CAISO. Do you, in negotiating it through the California process, do you suddenly make it unattractive for any other states to join? That I think will be one thing that'll be watched very closely if this begins to move again.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad we actually don't have to, recommend a position to the board right now. I have more questions that I can ask you offline. I also would love to chat with some friends over at, CLCV and 350 and all of that. And so maybe we can agendize this again as it moves later next year. So thank you for that. We do have one more agenda item in just a few minutes. Sorry, we did start a little late, so hopefully we won't have to go too long, but why don't we just head to our last agenda item right now, which is review Senate Bill 420 and Assembly Bill 914 related to transmission projects, CEQA streamlining and permit streamlining for existing distribution power lines, and provide direction on policy positions if necessary. So I can turn it over to you. I have time to, I don't know what everyone's time, constraints are. I can sit through this, but let's move forward and then let us know if you have to pop off.
And I can be really speedy. So
Okay.
both of these, oh, go on.
Madam Chair, we have another meeting immediately after, but I've let them know that we're going to run about 5 minutes late.
Great.
Great, thank you. So as you know, the committee approved and the board approved a policy that allows us to take bill positions without discussion at the committee, unless those bills are not part of the policy platform or especially high profile. Both of these bills that we're talking about today have to do with goals that this committee's previously talked about, which is increasing transmission and interconnection timelines. But they do so by making changes to the CEQA process. And that's why we wanted to talk about them with you today. So the first bill is SB 420. And what this bill would do is try to, again, it would try to get transmission lines established more quickly. So right now, and I will note that what's in the staff report was just recently amended. So instead of looking at the staff report, which is now outdated, I will give you sort of the update on what it does. So right now, this bill would do two things. It would simplify the process for priority transmission projects. So these are projects that are meant to be meeting grid reliability or clean energy targets by designating a lead agency to designate certain key transmission projects as priority projects. And it would also rely on the CAISO to identify additional projects that should be streamlined and should be able to, and in fact, I'm looking exactly at what just got amended. It would allow certain projects that are identified by CAISO as being able to go through a faster CEQA process that the governor already designated last year, which is the Electrical Transmission Projects Environmental Leadership Development process. And by going through that process, it would allow them to go through a 270-day CEQA process, as opposed to what can sometimes take a 4-year CEQA process. So that's sort of the big change that bill would do is, one, directing the governor to identify a lead agency that would monitor these projects and make sure that they are identifying key projects that are going to help the state meet their reliability and clean energy goals. And then 2, working with CAISO and then also with the POUs to identify key projects that are going to be able to go through this special already approved governor process of this environmental leadership projects. So that's the first bill. I'll note that Cal CCA has supported it. It is sponsored by the American Clean Power Association. There's various clean energy groups and environmental groups that have supported it. The only opposition has actually since been removed, which was from San Diego Gas and Electric, and they are no longer opposed. I'm going to just go to the next bill before we discuss this one. So the next bill is AB 914, which is Assemblywoman Friedman. This is also a bill that was amended pretty significantly. So what this bill at this point would do, again, this is meant to reduce the timeframes that it takes to bring new electrical grid infrastructure online. And this bill would establish a 2-year time limit for state agencies to complete CEQA review and approve or deny an application for an electrical infrastructure project. If the 2-year timeframe is not met, the state agency would have to submit a report to the legislature detailing the reasons for why it's not met. Right now, that's all the bill does. There were CEQA exemptions in this bill that were taken out as part of the committee process, and the committee directed Assemblywoman Friedman to bring together a group of stakeholders that cared about this bill, so environmental groups, IOUs, labor, to figure out what the right CEQA exemptions are. So the CEQA exemptions that were initially in this bill were deemed to be not the right ones by environmental groups. And so the author has agreed and is currently working to look at new CEQA exemptions that would help streamline clean energy infrastructure. And the reason we brought both of these bills today is that, they are aligned with values that this committee previously talked about, which is we have a huge delay in terms of transmission, interconnection, and permitting. Both of these try to solve those issues in really sort of strategic, focused ways. And there are other proposals right now, most notably, you may have seen that 2 days ago, the governor announced a strike team that he was putting together to deal with transmission delays. And he put forward 11 separate trailer bills, specifically looking at how to reduce transmission delays and interconnection delays. That was immediately opposed by a very large group of environmental groups. I think the concern with the governor's approach is that doing things through the budget is sort of a black box. There's no transparency. There's no policy committees. These 2 bills go through the policy channels. They use, again, really sort of targeted approaches to make changes to CEQA. And so those are the reasons we wanted to bring these 2 forward, even though we don't usually bring CEQA bills forward.
So is this something you need direction on right now? It seems like the bills are still pretty new in their evolution. And so I know that they've probably passed through one house or probably in the other house right now. Do you need us to talk about this today, or is it something we can bring back next month? Is that too late? I just, knowing that you all have a new meeting in 4 minutes ago, because I have questions, I have thoughts. I don't know if it's just something you need the okay to. What's your time frame?
The bills are passing through the assembly right now. They've passed out of appropriations. So there will be in the other house. I think we would like direction on if these are the types of bills that we can continue exploring and staying engaged in as they go through the policy committee. When they get to the Senate, things will be, moving pretty quickly again. And I think as we previously discussed, we want to weigh in at a time when our voice still matters. But I understand we're at the very end of this time. So perhaps it's just getting direction on, are these the types of bills we want to continue exploring, these 2 in particular, And Ted, I don't know if you have other thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need direction and we need, whenever CEQA comes up, we need to have a fulsome discussion. So I don't want to preempt that. I generally, but it's also, if we say we want to move CEQA through the policy process, we're going to have to then come back every time. So it was a little bit more of the idea of introducing, like, getting a sense of how engaged in CEQA issues when it comes to accelerating electricity development we want to be engaged in.
I mean, I think we should be engaged in it. I think it's an important balance. You know, CEQA could talk all day about CEQA and the pros and cons of exemptions and prioritizing and this and that. So I would like to talk about it in further detail. I don't know, do my fellow committee members?
It looks like John has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I actually would make a motion to support these bills. I've been kind of tracking them, but I understand where time is of the essence and that will take a longer discussion. But I think Chair Klein Lopez is exactly right. These are the types of bills we should be going forward. I think staff is completely aware of this. CEQA is CEQA. I won't say much more than that. But I do think that this is something that staff should continue. So if anything, we should probably put this with a recommended position of support on maybe our next agenda and have the discussion right away from that standpoint.
Yeah, okay. I think we can bring a recommendation back so that we have something on the table next month.
If that's okay time-wise with you all.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was a way to take a position today, that's always ideal. Just again, it allows us to weigh in earlier. But if I realize we are really at time, so also understand if that's not possible.
Cedric, any thoughts?
I concur with all of you guys in regards to we are out of time, and I would like to not be rushed through that process to be thorough.
Okay, Rita, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. It's something we should watch and would look forward to more discussion on it.
Okay, all right.
All right,
So-
we'll bring back a formal recommendation so that the next month, so that the conversation can be focused.
That sounds great.
Perfect.
With that, I hope my fellow committee members don't mind. We are going to skip member comments unless there's something really urgent, but I know we started a bit late, so that's about to snowball into the rest of everyone's day. So if with no other objection, I will adjourn the meeting. Our next meeting will be on June 28th. With that, we are adjourned.